What can the region do to sort of spur competition in those sub-regions, I think is to me as important for the future of this competition, if it has one, as how do we get Mexico and MLS teams clashing against each other in these games that we all want to see.
Morning. On today's Hot Topic, we welcome the return of CONCACAF Champions Cup. And to get the details on the 2026 edition and what the future may hold for this competition, we welcome in Jon Arnold, expert in North American soccer. And you might know him from his work getting CONCACAF. Welcome in, Jon. Thank you for joining us here.
Hey, good morning, guys. Always good to be back. Always good to have the CONCACAF Champions Cup back.
Yeah. It feels like we're back. I mean, again, I keep noting this, Jon, that this is the last time it's going to be like this for the American, for MLS clubs that are participating in this thing. Obviously, there are other things going on besides just MLS participating in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. But, with the calendar switch coming in 2027, this is kind of still an odd situation, or this feels a little odd. Give us a sense of where we are with the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I know we had games last night in the first round, and the general vibes around the tournament this year.
I mean, I think that in general, the CONCACAF Champions Cup will be as strong as the competition becomes. And, I think we've seen the Seattle Sounders win the trophy. We've seen MLS teams reach the final in the last 2 years. But overall, when you look, it's 19 of 20 of the last champions have been from LigaMX. And so I think that, you're always kind of going into this tournament with this, well, could somebody else break through? Is something different going to happen? Will this be the year? And sort of until that becomes something that regularly happens, I think you're always going to be in this boat. And as you mentioned, like maybe things shift too wildly before then for us to even look at this as the same era, right? There's chatter we might get into like, hey, could MLS be in Libertadores and LigaMX teams be back in Libertadores? What would that do to the landscape? But for right now, I think that you have an exciting tournament ahead of you. You have an interesting competition. And last night showed it with some of the games and some of the results. I mean, we're only 3 games down, and there was already, I think, a jaw dropper with San Diego coming, I think it was 1-0 Pumas, then it was 1-1 in like the 75th minute, and all of a sudden San Diego takes a 4-1 advantage to Mexico City. These are things that you say, well, we didn't think that was going to happen even 2-3 years ago. The series isn't over, that tie isn't over, but when an MLS team that's only existed for 365 days on the field is competing with a grande of Mexico, I think you can say, oh, well, this could be a competition that will be worth watching, that will be interesting, and might produce more surprises than what you've seen as the end result 19 of 20 times, which is a big Mexican club lifts the trophy.
Yeah, big 4-1 win for San Diego in their debut in the competition. Maybe undersold the impact, the quick impact that San Diego's had on the field as a team here. Obviously, this is a newish format with it being a knockout. It's a 2-legged first round. How have you enjoyed it as a knockout tournament rather than the previous iteration as a league?
Yeah, I mean, I think the groups needed to go. And one of the sort of balances as well as we talk big picture format is, well, what do you do with the Central American and Caribbean teams? Because they are part of the CONCACAF region. There are very proud teams with great histories. Last night we saw Olimpia, a Honduran team that made the semifinals in 2020. That's the last time a Central American or Caribbean team was able to make it that far. But we have seen surprises in this tournament. And of course, those teams are part of the region, and of course, they need to be in this competition. But how do they get there? What's the qualification like? Now CONCACAF has these split tournaments. I would say that like the actual format of the CONCACAF Champions Cup is way better than it was when there were groups. The straight knockout was fun. Now you've got the buys and all that stuff. That it's fine. But I think that the Central American Cup and the Caribbean Cup, in one way, can be seen as a good thing. All these Central American teams that like to, Liga in Costa Rica wants to prove that it's better than Municipal in Guatemala, and now they have a tournament where they can do that. That's not the CCC, but at the same time, like you really cut, not access because there's still the same number of teams, but it's a much longer road. It's much harder for some of these teams, I think, to really believe that they can compete, that they could make a semifinal run like Olimpia did in 2020, or lift the trophy like Saprissa did much farther back, right? So it's tough because right now, like the competitive reality is that these teams are not going to win the trophy, but their history is that they did lift. I mean, look, like even Europe has the same problem where you had these greats and could a Romanian team ever win the UEFA Champions League again? I don't think so. Not unless things change radically. That's how it is, right? With Costa Ricans, with teams from Suriname who have won before, but they're still part of the region. They still have proud soccer. They still matter. So how do you kind of mash them together, and what can the region do to sort of spur competition in those sub-regions? I think is to me as important for the future of this competition, if it has one, as how do we get Mexico and MLS teams clashing against each other in these games that we all want to see.
Yeah, when you obviously, when you edge the tournament more towards MLS versus LigaMX, then you're just reinforcing the power structures that already exist, and you're not doing enough to maybe allow those teams from Central America, the Caribbean, to make themselves known at the later stages of the tournament, which is the only way that we're going to, see them and hopefully they build them up. I mean, I think about Portugal, right? Can anybody really imagine a Portuguese team winning the Champions League again? Probably not going to. And it happened in our lifetime, but it's probably completely out the window at this point. That's very interesting. The way this is playing out from an MLS perspective, and with obviously Leagues Cup having happened and then kind of been scaled back, and we're not quite sure what the future of that tournament is. Is the Champions Cup feeling again like the thing? I mean, it is the preeminent tournament. Let's not pretend like Leagues Cups has passed it, but I think there are people who would say, well, MLS and LigaMX tried to undercut it. How has that gone?
I mean, I think that even like something that like, look, I watch Morning Kickaround. I know the audience. I see the folks I see the ultras in the comments, right? We are people generally who love the lower division game, who love every level, the game being respected in all markets. You guys dot the map and you say, hey, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Memphis, Tennessee are as important as New York and Mexico City. Even something like the Club World Cup that I think those types of fans do not like, I think has re-energized this tournament, because now the CONCACAF Champions Cup not only gives you the trophy, bragging rights for being the best team, it gives you this entrance to a much expanded tournament that everyone wants to be part of, and that gives you a lot of money, right? So the fact that all of a sudden you have this big prize at the end, like Inter Miami is saying, we want to win CONCACAF this year. Yeah, sure, we'll win MLS Cup again. Yeah, sure, we'll win the Supporters Shield again, but like top prize, CONCACAF Champions Cup. Toluca in Mexico, LigaMX back-to-back champion. They're like, what's next? We got to win CONCACAF Champions Cup to get to the Club World Cup, because we want to prove that we matter, and we want to have bragging rights over Club America, who hasn't played a Club World Cup yet, or Chivas, who haven't played a Club World Cup yet. So I think that has added a bit of spice for even the bigger teams to really chase this, to try and push. Inter Miami playing in the Club World Cup last time, but sort of admitting that, hey, we got that just because of our name and reputation and the money we spend. Now trying to do it on the field, I think that gives a lot of energy to these later rounds. And I do think, I think teams want to win Leagues Cup, but the format of CONCACAF Champions Cup, where, look, great result for San Diego last night. You pencil them into the next round, but they're not going to be easy in the altitude, in the atmosphere, and playing a legendary Pumas team that's still kind of getting some of the pieces together as the transfer window is still open. So, look, with that home-and-home format, it's always going to be seen as more equitable than Leagues Cup, I think rightly so. And so the fact that, and even the fact that Leagues Cup feeds into CONCACAF Champions Cup, right? Why are there so many MLS teams in this thing compared to LigaMX teams? Because MLS teams keep doing it in Leagues Cup. And so you kind of create that hierarchy where this does still feel to me like the preeminent tournament. And now there's that extra spice to try and really, really push and win the trophy.
Well, look, we're all sickos, right? We like seeing Mexican clubs have to go play in 10-degree weather in Hamilton, Ontario. We like the idea of San Diego thumping Pumas in San Diego, but having to go play to Mexico City where it's going to be a completely different. Like, I enjoy that. Obviously, in the modern era, as the Champions League has become the dominant soccer property, as FIFA has moved into the Club World Cup and tried to expand that to get their own piece of that pie, I'm sure CONCACAF is constantly thinking about all of these things, John, and that is certainly interesting to me. And it's been mentioned. You mentioned it here. We had somebody else in the chat bring it up. I was reading the supposed report on CONMEBOL offering something to LigaMX and MLS specifically in the Libertadores. How much truth or how much actual heat is there with that story? And is it even really a good idea in the big picture sense?
I think the thing is, like, whenever I did a short video on it, I posted the Ben Affleck exasperatedly smoking meme, because that's how I feel. I mean, we do have this conversation like every 3 weeks or something. If you're in these spaces of Latin American soccer, Mexican soccer, Mexican fans and LigaMX fans loved being in the Copa Libertadores, but I think it's viewed through rose-colored glasses, as so many things are. In soccer, in the world, right? The nostalgia of Tigres going to play River Plate and Monumental, clouds your memory that like Pumas had to travel to a random team that you can't even find anymore in Colombia, whatever, right? Like there were these moments that were amazing and heady and beautiful and romantic. And then there were these moments where you're like, nobody's tuning in for that, right? I think that logistically getting MLS teams and Mexican teams in the Libertadores is difficult. If the Whitecaps, who by their sporting merit probably should qualify in whatever situation you set up, having made MLS Cup and made the CONCACAF Champions Cup final, 16 hours to fly to Buenos Aires, and you can't short. I mean, what are you going to do? Like, right. People kind of say like, oh, but you could, well, what about, private jets and charters and et cetera, et cetera. No, it is far. It is very far from, and I was in Tijuana whenever some of the Brazilian teams were traveling there, and it really made the soccer worse. It's still fun. It's still a good tournament. So I think the idea of MLS teams and LigaMX teams in the Libertadores is great. It's fun. I get it. Logistically, I'm not sure how it works. I just don't know how you close that gap and still have soccer that matters both in the domestic league and in this regional competition. How do you cheapen? How do you not cheapen one or the other?
That's what it is for me, John. Sorry, you said unless. Continue. You haven't thought.
Sorry, man. I want to hear what your idea is, because I think a lot of people have, unless you say, and CONCACAF and CONMEBOL, remember, in 2022, I believe, announced a collaboration where they said, we're going to have a tournament at one single site with 4 teams. 2 teams from CONCACAF, 2 teams from CONMEBOL. They're all going to go to the same place. They didn't say Miami, but probably Miami, right? Then Buenos Aires, whatever, right? You can put it wherever, but if you get everybody to the same place and play it for a week, then you have but that's not Libertadores. That's not CONCACAF Champions Cup. So I think there's ways to bring these teams together and have these kind of romantic Messi versus River Plate, Messi at the Bombonera against Boca. But, Jason, I don't know exactly how you get the logistics right and still stay truthful to what a continental championship is.
Yeah, look, and I'm a realist. Like, I understand that everybody, whether you're in CONMEBOL, CONCACAF, whatever, they're all, and this has been the driving force behind MLS for the past 30 years, or at least once they kind of get out of there, we might fold any day period, which is, how do we, as a league, as a country, as a region, geographically locked out from playing against the biggest clubs in the world, or even the biggest clubs in our hemisphere, how do we figure out a way? And that's what Leagues Cup is, right? Leagues Cup is a way to try to break out of the restrictions that are placed on Mexican and American soccer by the geographical restrictions. But I'm also a romantic. And for me, this is a game that always has been sort of based on the region of the world you exist in. I don't want non-European teams playing in the Champions League. I don't know that I love the idea. I mean, obviously Mexico already participated, but I don't know if I love the idea of North American teams in Libertadores, because that's a South American competition. So, and if you give up your preeminent place, like, our top spot goes to the CONCACAF Champions Cup, if you are now saying, well, actually, and I don't think that's how Mexico did it, right? It wasn't league winners that went to the Libertadores. They were like a second tier of clubs that went to the Libertadores.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying too. These rose-colored glasses, where like you have this nostalgia of like, oh my goodness, the best teams, and it's like, Puebla played, with all respect to Puebla, yeah, fine, good team, whatever. Right. Like in that era, but like it was the top teams went to CONCACAF Champions Cup, and the teams after that in the table went to Libertadores, and I just think there are a lot of logistics. People forget too, like, man, I'm so glad it's not COVID, but like, hey, we had a pandemic where we all had to figure out like, how do we travel safely? And, there's been air disasters, and like, it's not, you can't just snap your fingers and say Messi's here, unless that's all you want. If all you want is Messi to play in Libertadores, yeah, you can, hey, we got a special pink ball and it's going to come out and it's going to go in this group and these games are going to go in these, and you can do that. Is that the Libertadores? Not how we've come to know it. So I think, yes, you could kind of, if you legitimately want long-term MLS teams and LigaMX teams in Libertadores, I think you'd have to figure out something. If you just want Messi in there, you just want one tournament, you can make that happen. Would it be legitimate? Would it be fun? Probably not legitimate, probably a lot of fun. So, it kind of, pick your pleasure, I guess.
Yeah, maybe I'm just an old guy shaking my fist at the clouds that we're not going to do it the way we're supposed to do it, right? And that's the thing. Maybe we're not. Maybe we have to be adaptable, but they feel like there should be some lines that you don't cross, which is basically like handing a spot to a club because they happen to have a famous player or the most famous player. That doesn't seem right to me.
We talked about possible encroachments, the Libertadores and in the League's Cup, but what could be maybe some gas on the fire for this competition is Major League Soccer's thought and plan to change the calendar to the fall to spring side. So we like CONCACAF Champions Cup in part because it is the sign of the season to come. I mean, CONCACAF Champions Cup, and that means we're just a few weeks away from Major League Soccer returning. So with the plan to change to the fall to spring calendar, Major League Soccer would be in the middle of their season potentially at that point. Does that change the focus of Major League Soccer teams on this competition?
I think the calendar switch could help some, and I also think that things are already changing. I mean, if you watch the San Diego Pumas match last night, I think traditionally you've seen the Mexican clubs really be strong in that last 10, 15 minutes where their fitness is up and last night it was the opposite. Like San Diego looked fresh. Their changes were fantastic. The fact that Vasquez and Maiton, the substitutes, both scored. They both helped set up other goals. That sort of refresh. And they talked about why aren't MLS teams able to compete? The depth. I think you're really seeing some things start to change, and some of that's credit to specifically what San Diego did, but some of it is a trend that we've seen, like with the Vancouver Whitecaps twice going to Mexico and winning. Columbus Crew, they went into Mexico. They didn't win the final, but they're able to get to the final, beating some very historic and prestigious teams. And I think you see the MLS teams are starting to get more depth. They're starting to have, so even with that calendar not being switched, I think the focus is there. The preparation is right. There's a blueprint. There's a model. How can you compete if you're an MLS team? And it's not always going to work. Best laid plans can go awry, but I think that overall MLS teams have done a good job of figuring out how to get ready, how to get up to speed. And I think you see it bearing out, in the results. Obviously more teams will get involved here, but so far we got San Diego and it's looked good, Jason.
Yeah, let me ask you about the way, this is not necessarily related to international competition, but the way you think the calendar switch will impact the player market in North America. Because obviously you have Apertura Clausura, but you're still lined up in a way with Mexico you haven't been before.
Well, and one thing I wrote about that I think is really affecting the Mexican teams that played specifically last night, Tigres, America, and Pumas. One thing I wrote about on Getting CONCACAF this week is you have this transfer window, and Mexico's already 4 weeks in, but like the biggest shifts are happening right now, and you're a quarter of the way through your short tournament, right? So these clubs feel like they're in this weird state of flux as they go into CONCACAF Champions Cup. And yes, you've had rhythm, and yes, you've played 4 matches together, but all of a sudden, America doesn't have their best player in Alvaro Fidalgo in the midfield, and Alan Saint-Maximin leaves, so you're down a winger. They're down 2 starters from their normal squad, and then it's, you get chucked into the mix in Honduras, and they're able to get a win, credit to them. Pumas, they get Uriel Antuna, who's going to be a starting player for them because they sold Jorge Rubalcaba to an MLS team, but he's not ready to go yet because he showed up 4 days ago. He doesn't, he's not ready. So I think that, yes, it will change with the calendar, maybe not as drastically as we'd like, but I think that MLS, one thing I've heard from ownership when I've spoken to MLS owners for years is we would do better business if the transfer, the transfer windows were more aligned with Europe, because right now you have to decide in the middle of your season in the summer, do we let this guy go or not? And it's going to tank our season. And Mexican clubs are sort of making that decision in the winter window. But I do think that the window switch, if everything stays the same, will help MLS teams even more. And listen, like I'm saying, hey, like MLS teams are getting better. I think people might hear me say the gap is closing between MLS and LigaMX. But again, 19 of the last 20 teams that have lifted the CONCACAF Champions Cup have been from Mexico. So MLS does need that little help. They need those little boosts. And I think that the calendar can provide another little boost for those teams, right?
So before we let you go, thank you so much for filling us in on the CONCACAF Champions Cup and the season that we're starting and what's perhaps to come. There's definitely some moving parts, but San Diego wins their debut in the competition 4-1. And one of the tropes of the competition is Mexican teams going home and overcoming big differences in aggregate. Does San Diego hold on in the second leg of this round against Pumas?
I think they will, because I think Pumas' attack is still sort of figuring out what it's going to be. Robert Morales had an amazing goal for Pumas, but then you kind of look in the rest of the game. What did they create? Jordan Carrillo, the winger who went to Europe and now he's back on loan with Pumas. He had a good league game, but I didn't think he was super relevant last night. So, Pumas have a lot of different players. Again, Antuna might be up and ready to run. I think San Diego will still get it done, partly because I think that, again, I didn't like how they handled the Irving Lozano situation. I didn't like how they handled some of the, things, the movements around that. But 4-1 win at home, you got to credit what Mikey Barras did and what he continues to do and what the whole organization is doing. So I think they will hold on, but, the messaging for them has to be all week, this thing isn't over, because we have seen many MLS teams have that advantage and then lose it in altitude, in a difficult place to play in the CEU, and against a team that is really good, that has talent. I mean, look, they scored 4 goals past Keylor Navas, right? It's not just some joker in there at goal. Like, Keylor is still playing well. He's still Keylor Navas, and they were able to do what they did. So, it bodes well. I think they'll hold on, but it's certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely murder from the flanks for San Diego last night. John, before we let you go, we have a running bit. You say you check in on us, which means you might know about it. We have a running bit about pronunciation. Now, I'm not saying I'm great with all languages. Obviously, hablo español en casa, so I have a little bit of that. But Rob tries really hard, and I know he hates it. But tonight, I'm not going to ask him to say it. Tonight in Guatemala, we have a game. Monterrey is playing. Who are they playing against, John?
Shelasu. A lot of times I'll go with they're the Super Chivos. They're from the Highlands. Okay. They don't get to play at home. They got a great home atmosphere, but their stadium isn't good enough for CONCACAF. They're trying to totally renovate it, so that'll be fixed in the future. But they play 3.5 hours. But look, a lot of times when we've seen these tournaments in the past, 3 hours away, there's nobody there. This will be full. I mean, they really have, but that's it's the Guatemalan Highlands. It's different, so don't feel bad, Rob. It's not your traditional Spanish. You got a little, you got some elements in there that are not your Castellano. So it's all good, man. But go with Super Chivos. That's easy to say.
There you go. See, I wasn't trying to pick on him. I was asking an expert, what's our move here? John knows.
I know you think about this more than I do, Jason, but it's it's constant. Well, do I say Monterrey or do I say Monterrey? Do I say Cruz Azul or Cruz Azul? But either way you go, and I know you know this, either way you go, there's people in the comments that are like, why is he saying it weird? Or why didn't he say it?
Yeah.
Hey, we're all trying our best, Rob. So that's all we can ask.
Absolutely. John, I appreciate it. So we got a guest sticking up for us. Thank you so much for sticking up for us and then telling us all about the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Outside of getting CONCACAF your Substack, is there anywhere else the folks can find your work?
Yeah, I do short vertical videos on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, which you can find on Jon Arnold FC. I was going to spell my name, but I guess it's right there, unlike our normal radio conversations, Jason. And, I do some shorts, and then I've got a long-form horizontal video travel series, guides to the World Cup cities in Mexico. The first one is in Guadalajara. It's out on that YouTube page. The second one, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it'll be out at the end of February. I'll be traveling. Actually, people will probably be able to figure out pretty easily. But I'll be traveling next week to see some matches and also to do some more. And then hopefully we'll close out Mexico. And so people can check that out as well. If you're headed to Mexico for any matches, the focus is World Cup. But if you're going for any games, show you where to eat beforehand, how to get into the stadium, how to get home, what neighborhood to stay in, what to eat afterwards, and if you want to have to drink it too as well, I've got you covered. So
John's got you on phrases you can use to get the right stuff. That's always good. Thank you, John. Thank you, John.